because we are blessed with some really fine journalists turned nonfiction writers, I want to ask you a little bit, to what extent does your journalistic training inform how you, A, research your fiction, and B, write your fiction? And I'm also wondering secondarily, and maybe this should be primarily, do you think that helps or hurts? Because the reason I say why it might hurt, were you to listen to the pacing panel that wonderful writer, Deaver, Rollins, Finder, we go down the list, Sanford, they would have you remove as much research. They want as streamlined and non-historical, non-essential, economical prose. To what extent does it inform how you research, and to what extent does it inform how you write, and is that good or bad?
I do a lot of research. I've always done loads of research, both for fiction and for nonfiction. I mean, I live on research. And somebody had said they were the research queen. That's how I like to think of myself also. And I mean, because I always do a Law and Order twist, even with the nonfiction, or with the fiction. But I think you can still have the pacing in, even with the fiction. My latest book is narrative nonfiction, so it reads like fiction, but it's all nonfiction. I mean, the dialogue is verbatim from undercover Skype tapes, from case reports, the whole deal. You can still have that amazing pacing in there, and everything is real. So you can use it to your benefit, and I think the research only adds. It's a great tool. It brings absolute, reality to what you're writing. And you can't get better than the truth, because it is so incredibly strange. The stuff you've been talking about, how twisted things are. You can't make some of this stuff up. If you took it in as fiction, they would throw it out. Nonfiction, you get away with it.
Kathleen, what do you think?
Well, I actually think there's a hunger out in today's world for true stories, partly because of the demise of newspapers and the conglomerization of television. And so I kind of flip it around. I write my nonfiction, which is very, very deep in research, but I write it like fiction. I characterize people. I go to the places they were in. I follow my sources around. I live with them for weeks and weeks at a time. And I try and understand what they would smell at this time in the crime that was being undertaken. But to me, nonfiction, there's like this renaissance going on right now in nonfiction book writing, because really good stories and really good research are rare. And thanks to so many of my friends here at Thrillerfest, I'm learning more and more how to do that pacing and that characterization, so you really think it is a novel.
Does you teach, just staying on this topic for a second, I mean, you teach at the highest levels nonfiction writing, and you also are doing the really commercial fiction. How does one inform the other? Does one complicate the other? Are they two separate compartments in your brain?
No, actually, they're very close. I mean, a lot of my novels grew out of nonfiction stories I wrote. For example, I did a story for Smithsonian Magazine on the Oak Island treasure hunt, and they never found treasure. And that became my novel Riptide. And then I did a story for the New Yorker on the Anasazi cannibalism in the Southwest, the whole theory that there was an outbreak of cannibalism in the 12th century. And that I worked into my novel Thunderhead. And then I did a story about a meteorite that was found in Greenland, and that became The Ice Limit. So, almost, I'd say every single one of my fiction books have started with a nonfiction story.
But that's the substance informing sort of the underlying theme. What about the crafting of it? Where does your nonfiction training and how you seek to teach others dovetail with how you actually craft the stories for the fiction?
Well, I think that actually nonfiction writers could learn a lot from fiction writers. I think that the crafting of a story goes the opposite direction, and that is that in writing nonfiction, you've got to tell a good story. And you have to tell a true story, and that often is very difficult because life is very messy. And so, as Kathleen was saying, the most successful nonfiction writers are the ones who think like a novelist, who think of the arc of the story, because that's who we are as human beings. We want to hear a story. We don't want to hear facts and figures. So yeah, this is a stream that goes both ways.
This is about you guys, not me, but I just had one observation along those lines. When the series that I won the Pulitzer for was Driven to Distraction, and in that series, I wrote it about a year after I wrote my first novel, which was a fast-paced thriller, and I borrowed very heavily from the narrative structure that I learned in fiction. What I thought in fiction was I've got to keep the reader's interest. You know, one time in newspapers, we took it for granted we had your interest because we were the only game in town. And increasingly, we have to, you know, we really have to draw you in the same way you do in. So your point's very well taken. I see that now in retrospect. Did anybody else want to comment on the? Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, I'm kind of, and I'm going to be contrarian just for the sake of being contrarian a little bit, but and part of it was because my agent actually just walked in the room, and my agent, a very wise man named Dan Conaway. Do you like the plug? Is that good? He gave me a homework assignment not long ago. He said, read 3 James Patterson books. Just go, read them. I'm like, okay. Not normally what I read, you know, not judging or anything. He's just not normally. And now, mind you, a very reputable publication called the New York Times Magazine, maybe you've heard of it, Matt, reported, I believe this time last year, they did a big feature.
Rupert Murdoch shut it down yesterday.
He's been wanting to for a while.
He's also shut down this conference. And yeah, go ahead.
Did a long profile about Patterson, and one of the really shocking things it reported, James Patterson has 1 out of every 17 hardcover novels in this country sold in the last 4 years had James Patterson's name on it. Okay, so the man knows a little bit about what people want. And here we are all obviously reality junkies on this panel. You know, the reality infuses all of our work. We do our research, everything like that. And I'm starting to think maybe that's overrated. And yes, I'm being contrarian just to get a rise out of all of you. But because you know what, you read James Patterson and here, like I pride myself on the authenticity of my books. I mean, like I have walked every mile that my characters walked. I've seen everything. And you know what? If Patterson is a judge of what readers want, I don't think they care about that at all. Because you read his books and like, okay, there was an Alex Cross novel where he had this he invented this serial killer named Chop It Off Chucky, who was hacking the private parts off of young children in Washington, D.C., which is, okay, that's one thing. But he said that basically the local newspaper didn't care because they were black children. And like, okay, I was a reporter for the Washington Post for a while. I think we would have cared just slightly if there was a serial killer running around Southwest, you know, mutilating children. Like, I think that would have gotten on the radar screen a little bit.
Your point's very well taken.
Nobody cares.
And maybe somebody wants to reflect, but if you go down the list of the really top selling folks, it's very Spartan and oftentimes can gloss over in very simplistic ways how people react, what the facts are. What do you guys think about what Brad's saying? Is the mass market less interested in an authentic or slightly authentic experience and more interested in
escapism? Who
did what to whom?
Yeah, I think you know what I mean. I really think they're looking for escapism.
Well, I think we both are. I mean, I think we, at different times in our day, we're looking for a little bit of everything. I mean, I'm sure some of us start our day by reading the New York Times or opening the news of the week. But then at nighttime, you know, we like a little escapism and pick up a James Patterson. So I don't think they're, you know, what I love about this panel and what we're talking about is how each one informs the other in real life and in our art.
But I still want my thriller to be believable. I don't want huge loopholes where you can drive that, you know, Mack truck through it. I want to think that this could actually happen. And that, to me, is what makes it scary.
See, I almost think as writers, we need to get over that.
Oh,
because I don't know if the readers, like, if we're being honest, like, of course, as a writer, I want that too. But as readers, I don't know if the readers really care.
But even as a reader, I want to be able to believe this could happen.
The trick is that the two don't have to be mutually exclusive. The trick is if we're good enough storytellers, we can include the fact and the research and all the cool stuff we've learned, and the reader just thinks we're telling a story.
Right.
I mean, it's all in the service of the story. And I come at it kind of from a different angle than everyone else here, because I never wrote nonfiction until after I'd already had 4 fiction books published. My background was in the radio business, and I was writing and sold my novels, and then got out of the radio business as a day job, if you will, realized I wasn't going to make a full-time living writing the novels, and had to find a new day job, and started working for a magazine. It's a fluffy little lifestyle thing, and I write stories about food and interior design, things I know nothing about. But as long as the people reading that story don't realize I have no idea what I'm talking about, then I'm telling the story well. I've done the research, I've interviewed the people I need to talk to who do know what they're talking about, and if I can communicate the story, even if it's not something I'm interested